Abraham Lincoln was, as his contemporaries could attest, extremely hard to beat in a wrestling match. We're not talking about college wrestling, and certainly not the kind of wrestling that involves choreographed chair slams. This was informal grappling in fields and behind stores, where a clean fall settled arguments and set pecking orders. Lincoln was tall for his time, about 6 feet 4 inches, with long arms and farm-hardened strength. Years later, the National Wrestling Hall of Fame would summarize his record the way locals already told it. Widely known for his wrestling skills with only one recorded defeat in a dozen years. They eventually bestowed on him the title of Outstanding American in 1992. You could call that something of an understatement. In the early 1830s, Abraham Lincoln was a newcomer to the village of New Salem, Illinois. The Clary's Grove Boys, a loose social circle of farmhands, laborers, and woodsmen living nearby, prided themselves on strength and mischief, and dominated the local scene. Perhaps the most notorious among them was Jack Armstrong, the champion of this veritable frontier fraternity. The surviving paperwork from the era is thin, but state and museum summaries, as well as curated Lincoln resources, agree on the basic outline of their encounter. Armstrong sent word through intermediaries that he wanted to see if the new store clerk was really as tough as advertised. Seeing it as a friendly test rather than a fight, Lincoln accepted, and the whole town turned out to watch. The match took place on a patch of grass near Offutt's store with a crowd of locals, including the Clary's Grove Boys, gathering in a ring. At first, both men circled carefully, testing grips. Lincoln's long reach and leverage gave him an edge, but Armstrong's low center of gravity made him difficult to topple. They struggled for several minutes, each throwing partial moves and breaking apart. Eyewitnesses later described it as the fiercest wrestling ever seen in New Salem. When Armstrong realized Lincoln might actually beat him, he tried to use a tripping move considered slightly unfair under the informal rules. Lincoln objected, accusing him of foul play, not angrily, but firmly. The crowd of Clary's Grove Boys, protective of their leader, closed in around them, shouting encouragement and possibly threats. Tension rose fast. At this point, Lincoln did something that many later biographers highlight as telling. Instead of backing down or losing his temper, he straightened up, stepped back, and challenged the whole crowd. One account, recounted by Herndon from New Salem residents, quotes Lincoln as saying something close to, "You've got the best man in your crowd here, and you can't lick me fair. You'll have to try it all together." The Clary's Grove Boys, amused and impressed by his fearlessness, backed off. Armstrong himself stopped the fight, reportedly laughing and extending his hand. "He's the best fellow that ever broke into the settlement," Armstrong is said to have told his friends. But Lincoln's near-perfect wrestling record has one notable exception. Britannica describes the legend thus, quote, "Legend has it that he lost only once in 1832 during the Black Hawk War to the champion of another volunteer military unit. Their match was to determine which troops would get a preferred campsite. This incident is often described as the odd fall, and is Lincoln's single recorded defeat in over a dozen years of matches. The match was scheduled as best 2 out of 3 falls. Lincoln's side chose a particular hold called Indian Holt, or Holt, while Thompson's side chose Side Holt. They grappled, changed techniques, and in one fall, Thompson threw Lincoln fairly, earning applause. Lincoln acknowledged the fair throw, saying Thompson had thrown him, quote, broadly so. The detail sticks because it fits the broader pattern. Even in defeat, he kept order rather than letting the usual melee erupt. It's characteristic of how people remembered his temperament, strong but steady. His knack for diffusing trouble shows up off the wrestling ground too. At 19, working a flatboat downriver, he and partner Alan Gentry were jumped at a landing by club-wielding men during a night stop on the lower Mississippi. In recollections later gathered by Lincoln's law partner William Herndon, it's said that Lincoln threw the attackers overboard and shoved the boat back into the current. Locations and exact details vary in different retellings, but the core story of ambush, counter, and escape comes up again and again in sources that trace the trip below Baton Rouge toward New Orleans. Similar feats of strength appeared in the recollections of his neighbors, who recall Lincoln performing impressive stunts with barrels and hogsheads. A commonly repeated version has Lincoln taking a bet to hoist a full barrel of whiskey above his head to drink from the bunghole in winning. It's exactly the sort of anecdote that grows in the telling, but it appears in long-running Lincoln compilations that collect local reminiscences. This shows the image people carried of him, unusually strong and unafraid to show it. Speaking of whiskey barrels, in 1833, Lincoln and his friend William F. Barry operated a general store in New Salem. It wasn't a rowdy saloon or a fancy inn. In small Illinois settlements, general stores offered groceries, dry goods, and measured alcohol sales at county-set prices. Barry and Lincoln's tavern license gave them permission to sell whiskey, brandy, or wine by the drink, and to offer meals and lodging for travelers, essentially coming just shy of running an actual boarding house. Picture the setup. A wooden counter in a dim room, barrels behind it, a few tin cups, and crude tables. The whiskey would have been locally distilled corn liquor, often sold by the half pint or quart. Meals might be a plate of salt pork and beans. The clientele were farmers, ferrymen, or passing traders, sometimes rowdy, sometimes broke, often both. Lincoln's role wasn't glamorous. He was the bookkeeper and clerk, not the life of the party. He was known to be polite, sober, and famously didn't drink alcohol. He saw what it did to people and wanted no part of it. Locals later said he was friendly but cautious. A man who could pour your whiskey and still keep his hands clean. The business didn't thrive. Barry had a drinking problem, an unfortunate trait in a man who owned a liquor license. Lincoln found himself yoked to a partner who was, as he later put it, quote, no businessman. The store was open odd hours, the customers were slow to pay, and the debt mounted. In a small community with limited cash, many purchases were made on credit. Lincoln's honesty meant he kept meticulous accounts, but honesty doesn't pay the bills when the customers don't either. After Barry died, Lincoln was left with the entire debt of the failed venture, amounting to several $100s, which was a crushing sum at the time. Locals called it the national debt, jokingly because it seemed so huge and so enduring. It took him years to pay it off, long after the tavern license had expired and the store's shelves were bare. But Lincoln did pay it, every cent, through years of legal work and steady thrift. That quiet act of responsibility became one of those small telling anecdotes that shaped Lincoln's lasting image. A young man who took on debt that wasn't really his and honored it anyway. Lincoln had a few other personal oddities not many people know about. The best documented is his patent. In 1849, after poor riverboating experiences, such as grounding on shoals, he filed for and received U.S. Patent number 6469, a device to buoy vessels over obstacles. This makes him the only U.S. president who is also a patentee. The model sits in the Smithsonian today. The patent specification lives in the official record. It was never manufactured, but the paperwork is unambiguous and the distinction is unique. There's also his softer side. Lincoln liked animals, especially cats. According to White House historians, Mary Lincoln said that his, quote, hobby was cats, and contemporary reporting credits him with the first resident felines kept in the White House. It's a small detail, but it's the kind that stands out because it pleasantly collides with his public image as the Civil War president. Taken together, these side doors into his life make Lincoln legible before the marble. His wrestling record is the most vivid, a near undefeated run in rough and ready matches that set social standing on the frontier, capped in modern times by a Hall of Fame plaque. The tavern episode is quieter but firmer, a short-lived license and a bond that put his name on the dotted line. The same person remembered for the Emancipation Proclamation can also be remembered for clean slams in the dirt and for pouring whiskey from behind a bar. He was strong but controlled in public tests and willing to shoulder obligations in business, and it is these characteristics, among many others, that make him one of the most memorable figures in American history.